I think the biggest thing Jaws 2 will be remembered for is its tagline. One of the most famous taglines in movie history, just when you thought it was safe to go back in the water. Yes, that's actually Jaws 2, not Jaws 1, which some people think that it is. So this one is directed by Jeannot Swartz, obviously Jaws 1, famously directed by Steven Spielberg. This is a 1978 movie and was Universal's biggest hit in that year. Now this, like the original Jaws film, was fraught with production issues. As you may remember, Steven Spielberg had to be very imaginative whilst making Jaws because of a variety of different issues, and this one is the same. Most notably here, the star Roy Scheider didn't want to get involved in it. Now, Steven Spielberg was invited back, but he was doing Close Encounters, so he couldn't return. Scheider didn't want to do it, but he was talked into it by the studio through contract negotiations. But on top of that, he really did not get along with director Jeannot Swartz. Swartz really these days is known for TV work. He's still directing, but you know, the last few years he really just does TV shows. The other issue is with this movie is that it did have the same production values, you know, weather, all sorts of stuff. The studio wanted to decide they wanted to change the tone of the movie halfway through. It went massively over budget. The budget was around, I believe it was around 30 million for the time, was quite high, but it never started out that high. And when it's all said and done, this movie is more or less a remake of the original film. It follows Amity, again, the same kind of town, and once again it is terrorised by a great white shark, and once again we have Roy Scheider's character, Chief Brody, with no one believing in him that it's a kind of a great white shark. We've got the mayor once again kind of like sticking his fingers in the air and kind of doesn't want to hear about it because he's trying to kind of get some you know, real estate development deal going or something along the lines of that. Inevitably there are deaths and it's up to Brody to obviously stop the shark. This time though he's doing it solo. He doesn't have that kind of that trio of great characters that obviously we had in the obviously the first movie. So that's obviously the lacking thing. I mean, Scheider here is great. He really is. Despite the fact that he obviously doesn't want to be in this movie, I still think he does an absolute stellar job. And it's the fact that you have this kind of returning character played by the same actor, along with Lorraine Gray, who plays obviously Ellen Brody as well, his wife. Really kind of, you know, you just add that kind of continuity that you kind of want. It feels like a second chapter, maybe not so much like the third and fourth film, which kind of seem cheap knockoffs really compared to this one. Whereas this one I would say genuinely does feel like it's a continuation, even though it's more or less a remake. You've obviously got the two sons as well, who actually appear in all four films. They're really the only characters that have a role in all four of these movies. Although they're played by different actors in every single film, which I don't think helps that series of that feel of continuity, because they don't really feel like the same characters, to be quite honest. And Dennis Quaid was a lot older than Lance Guest, and Dennis Quaid was in the third one, and Lance Guest was in the fourth one, playing the same character. But anyway, I'm digressing. The other thing with this movie is because of that you don't have that kind of the characterization and the kind of that back and forth between these very memorable characters like it did in the first one. It just doesn't feel quite as memorable as the original movie, because you only have Scheider here and it doesn't have any that kind of that banter and that back and forth with any kind of other major characters, with the exception maybe of his wife. But you know, this film feels very much a kind of by the numbers, knock it out basically. The effects, again, by today's standard, obviously they look a little bit ropey. There's one clearly kind of like quite crap shot here, but they did actually redesign the shark. This one's got like a burn across its face from a kind of earlier encounter. One thing that bothered me with this movie, I never felt there was really a money shot in this film of a shark attack. I mean, the shark, when we do see the attacks, it kind of like almost you see the kind of on top of someone, but you never really see anyone in its mouth. So I don't feel it ever really has that kind of that scare factor that you kind of maybe had in the first film. The film does have a couple of memorable scenes. I think probably the scene most people will think of is where the shark attacks a helicopter and kind of pulls it under. That's a pretty memorable scene for me. I always remember the scene with the beached killer whale, on there, and that's quite a memorable scene because again, it's just you think, man, something's attacked something equally as big as it. You know, you kind of has that kind of that fear there. The climax here I don't feel is as strong. Obviously, the original you had obviously the three guys versus the shark on the boat. Here you have Brody alone trying to rescue his sons, along with a bunch of other kids who are doing this kind of sailing in the kind of the middle of the sea there. But it just doesn't have that kind of that shock factor, that kind of scare factor. There are some pretty good acting by the kids, I have to say. There's one in particular who genuinely seems absolutely kind of terrified and is hysterical, who I think does a pretty good job. I think, man, she really is selling me the fact that she's kind of driving me nuts now. When it's all said and done, I feel Jaws 2 is a pretty good shark movie when you compare it to all of the kind of the shark movies that have come out, and there have been a lot. People don't realise how many shark films there are, and there is a lot. But it's I always say it's better than the bulk of them. It still really is, feels like somewhat of a B movie, aside from the fact that you have very capable actors in this film, and you know, with characters who you've bought into and care about. But it just seems the direction is somewhat pedestrian. It's very much by the numbers. It kind of doesn't have the kind of the nuances that the original film had. Even though it's more or less the same story, you never feel it kind of, you're bought into it just as much. The shark attacks never seem quite as interesting as well. The director here chose to show the shark quite early on, and we probably see a lot more of it in this film than we did in the original, but because of that, the element of suspense is somewhat lost. Now, he actually addresses this and sort of says, obviously you've seen the shark in the first movie, so there's no point kind of hiding it again. So I understand the argument, but nonetheless, as it affects this film, it just makes it not quite as memorable. But overall, I've got to say, I'll give it a 6 out of 10. I still feel it's a worthwhile watch. Far better than the kind of the other episodes that kind of came after that. Oh, I still do enjoy them, I'll admit that. But it's a decent watch. If the original Jaws hadn't happened, people probably would regard this as a pretty decent film. But as it did happen, as it stands at the moment, it does seem like really just like a pretender and like a very pale comparison. But it is worth watching because Scheider is so good at this. I keep calling him Scheider, so I do apologise. He's so good at this, and his character is so relatable and so kind of realistic. Even the fact that the guy did not want to be here, he did such a great job. So I'll give this movie a 6 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave him a comment, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.